A sideshow can be a rather scary place, but sometimes the scariest things happen once the show is over. A family with a startling deformity, a love life that turned to vicious violence, and a desperate attempt to resolve an unfixable problem. All this and more as we explore the anatomy of murder. The home of Grady Stiles, more popularly known as the Lobster Boy, was an unpleasant place to be. During the Carnival season in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Grady was one of the many sideshow performers who people came to gawk at, sometimes in wonder and sometimes out of rudeness. But Grady never concerned himself too much with the opinions of onlookers. He was only there to put on a show, whether his audience was impressed or not. Grady was born with a severe deformity called electrodactyly, which resulted in the fusion of Grady's fingers and toes to form what appeared to be pincers for extremities. This was obviously where he got the name Lobster Boy. Because of his deformity, Grady couldn't walk and was confined to a wheelchair, his legs almost flipper-like and unable to bear weight. This resulted in him using his upper body to maneuver around, usually in a wheelchair. All of that locomotion provided by his arms turned Grady into a rather strong man despite his downfalls. But he didn't only utilize his strength to make life easier for himself, but he used it to also make life harder for others. Screams often erupted from the trailer that Grady and his family called home. Grady frequently beat his wife, Mary Teresa Stiles, sometimes even in front of their 3 children, who he would at times beat as well. There was no doubt that Grady Stiles was a cruel man. Anytime the children would cry, Grady would never offer sympathy to them. Instead, he'd threaten them and berate them, exclaiming that he would give them something to truly cry about. His fingers, though fused, acted effectively as true pincers, viciously pinching his wife, choking her, and slamming her in the face. Aside from this, one of his more favorite ways to abuse his wife was to headbutt her in the face. Those who witnessed his outbursts remarked about how eerie and capable Grady was. In seconds, he would fling himself out of his wheelchair and scramble across the floor like an animal, holding himself up with his 4 meaty, enlarged fingers. He'd overwhelm his target and quickly take them to the floor, where he'd begin working on them with violent attacks. He was relentless, groping his wife harshly and tearing at her skin, jabbing at her eyes, anything he could to hurt her. At one point during one of these fights, one of Grady's daughters, named Kathy, who was pregnant at the time, attempted to break up the fight and separate the two by rolling Grady's wheelchair in between them. Grady became so infuriated by this that he turned his fury to Kathy and beat her so badly that she went into labor early and delivered a premature child born with the same deformity as their vicious grandfather. The Stiles home was an incredibly unstable place to be for everyone except Grady himself, but getting away from it all wasn't so easy. Grady Stiles had 3 children with Mary. Of them, 2 possessed the same deformities as their father. Truth be told, the deformities had been in their family for generations. Grady would often tell the crowds about how his father and grandfather and great-grandfather and so on had been born like he had been, and once his children aged a bit, he added them into his sideshow with him, traveling as an act known as the Lobster family. Of the many issues in their family, money really wasn't one of them in terms of poverty, as Grady would make anywhere between $50,000 to $80,000 per season and was considered one of the major stars of the show. There were no gimmicks with the Lobster family, no tricks or illusions. What the crowd saw is what the crowd got. Once the winter set in, the shows closed down, and many of their performers, including the Stiles family, resided in Florida until the new season came around. Despite the pleasant weather and more free time, Grady still didn't hesitate to inflict physical and emotional pain on his family. If only Mary had known when she was younger what she knew after marrying Grady, perhaps it would have made a difference. At age 19, Mary ran off to join the Carnival, escaping her old life. Oddly enough, she felt like she belonged best there, despite the fact that she was surrounded by people with shocking abilities and deformities. As for her, she was what could be considered normal. She wasn't there for the same reasons the performers were, but the Carnival always needed staff to keep the shows running. It was here that she met Grady Stiles, often watching him as he sat in a small cubicle and waved at those who passed by and stared with wide eyes and a mixture of disbelief and shock. Mary didn't see the monster so many others had. She quickly fell in love with Grady, and the two were married. Mary remembered that Grady was sweet as could be, a true gentleman. But when Grady got some alcohol in his system, something in his mind switched, and he became a much scarier man, a true monster, greater than the one others saw him as. He was a real nightmare come to life. Mary was impacted in ways that she would never forget. Mary remembered that Grady typically was a great guy when he woke up in the morning. He'd wake up at 8, be drinking by 10, and would be terrible the rest of the day. In 1973, their marriage hit its first end when Mary decided that she couldn't take the abuse any longer after Grady launched himself at her, took her to the floor, ripped her pantyhose away, reached his clawed hand inside of her, and ripped out her intrauterine device, a device used to prevent pregnancy. Mary was so disgusted and horrified, emotionally wounded from the actions, that she wisely left him. She went on to marry another man sometime later, but Grady's rage knew no limitations while the two were separated, and just because he was at a physical disadvantage didn't mean he was incapable of murder. In 1978, one of Grady's daughters named Donna had found love. Donna hadn't been seeing Jack Lane for very long, but the two were deeply in love. Donna, different sources claim, was between 15 and 17 years old and Jack was 18, but the two decided to get married anyway. Grady forbade the marriage, threatening to kill Jack numerous times. Donna, very unhappy with her drunk and abusive father, wanted an escape and told Grady that if he didn't approve the underage marriage, she would live with Jack anyway. This further enraged Grady, who prided himself in the ways he dominated his family and controlled them, and he eventually fulfilled his numerous promises of violence against Jack. Grady was at home when Jack came to see him on the night before Jack and Donna were to be married. It's unknown what truly happened at that time, but what seems to be believed is that Jack stood up to Grady and attempted to tell him exactly how it was going to be between himself and his love, Donna. Other sources say that Grady summoned Jack to his home for a private talk, perhaps leading Jack to believe that he would finally get Grady's approval to marry his daughter. Either way, once Jack arrived, he was met with the barrel of a gun and was shot dead by Grady in cold blood. Once Donna had discovered what her father had done, Grady sat and smiled at his distraught daughter, mocking her, saying, "I told you I would kill him." Grady went to trial where the defense attempted to get the jury to pity Grady and his condition. They played heavily into the fact that Grady had an unfortunate life, driven to drinking and violence by the incessant struggles he faced. Poor Grady was just a victim of his circumstances. Grady even managed to conjure up some tears in the courtroom. His daughter Donna took the stand, telling Grady that she would see him at his grave. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and came back with a verdict: guilty of third-degree murder. For it, Grady received a sentence of 15 years, but not in prison. 15 years of probation, a sentence that shocked many due to its leniency. But the truth of the matter was, the state believed that their prison system, even in their handicap-accessible facilities, wasn't equipped to handle the specific needs of Grady Stiles while behind bars, not only due to his deformity, but his numerous health conditions he had developed over the years from an unhealthy lifestyle. So Grady got to serve his sentence from home, where he continued to drink heavily and beat his children at the drop of a hat. Fate played an increasingly twisted game and brought Mary and Grady together again in 1989. Mary, surprisingly enough, forgave Grady and the two remarried, and Grady seemed rather decent for a time, but as it almost always goes, the violence surged back to the surface, as did copious amounts of sexual assault, where Grady would violate Mary with foreign objects. But the murder of Jack Lane wasn't the only murder that would be a part of Grady's unfortunate story. It came to a point one day, after yet another violent altercation, that Mary realized she needed to resolve this lingering issue. She was afraid for herself, but most of all for her family. During her years divorced from Grady and with another man in the sideshow, she had another child named Harry Glenn Newman Jr. He wasn't a particularly smart boy, but he loved his mother dearly and became part of the sideshow himself as a human blockhead, often driving nails into his face with a hammer. In November of 1992, Mary told Harry that something needed to be done about Grady and gave her son $1,500 to get someone to bring things to a beneficial conclusion. Harry took the money and hired 17-year-old Christopher Wyant, a Carnival worker who lived next door, to eliminate his stepfather Grady. The boy took the money, grabbed a gun, and approached Grady from behind in his trailer while he watched television in his underwear. A quiet moment before another inevitable act of violence. Christopher put 2 rounds in the back of Grady's head, killing him instantly. And that was it. After decades of torturous abuse, Mary and her children were free from the terrible lobster boy, Grady Stiles. But of course, the freedom came at a cost, as murder most often does. The police arrested Mary, her son Harry, and the killer, Christopher. Christopher was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years in prison. Harry was convicted of first-degree murder. He sobbed freely in the courtroom and claimed that it had to be done to save his mother and her children. Unfortunately for him, self-defense isn't applicable when hiring a hitman. The punishment for first-degree murder was a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Mary, who no one doubted had been violently abused regularly, still had to pay for her role in the murder, but her conviction was reduced to manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 12 years behind bars. Mary's son with Grady, Grady Stiles III, claims that his mother never had her son hire anyone to kill her husband, and that instead, Mary simply said out loud, "Something needs to be done." Harry overheard his mother say this and went to the neighbor, who decided to help them by killing Grady without Mary's knowledge. Either way, Grady's violence will always be remembered by his family, who harbor no love for who their father was, but instead reflect positive traits and are considered good people who have no urge to bring harm to anyone else. A huge thank you to Audible for sponsoring this episode. The people at Audible are big fans of Anatomy of Murder and have graciously decided to support this episode and my work. Audible is the leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 titles to choose from, and they're offering you, my viewers, a free 30-day trial to try out their incredible service, a service that I've been using for a few years now myself. All you need to do is go to audible.com/Rob to start your 30-day free trial. I'm currently listening to Secrets of the Sideshows, an audiobook that tells all about the secrets and history behind famous sideshow acts, from sword swallowing to ancient Egyptian magicians. It's shockingly interesting, but I won't spoil it for you. If you want to listen to something else, that's no problem. Audible has plenty of other genres to choose from fantasy to true crime to self-help, and much, much more. All you need to do is go to audible.com/Rob, start your 30-day free trial, listen anywhere you want, and expand your mind. Thanks for listening. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel now to see more videos from me, and be sure to press on screen or below this video to watch my last episode on 10 cases of children who killed their families, an especially twisted episode you won't want to miss. And I will see you next Sunday.